This is part one of what I'm going to call the Spielberg Project. We, on Storyline, are always talking about Steven Spielberg as one of our favorite directors just because he's absolutely amazing. Originally, Storyline started off as just telling people how to make a story, but it's kind of evolved into how to make a movie. And one of the great ways to learn something is to look at the masters. So I have decided that I'm going to go through Spielberg's entire filmography starting at the very earliest. I'm not going to be starting with Jaws, I'm going to go further back actually. I'd like to ask that y'all ignore the very cheap production of this because I am not the tech guy. That is all on Ben and James. So this is going to be extremely low budget and unstylized because I don't know what I'm doing. It might pick up later. We might actually have James involved later. For right now, he's very busy, and I don't want to bother him for the sake of increasing the quality of my little video project. So, this is what you get. The first thing that I watched is his first episode of Night Gallery, the kind of sequel, I guess you'd call it, to The Twilight Zone, which was produced and written by Rod Serling, who is one of the greats of television screenwriting. He was extremely prolific. He also influenced television writing for years. We're still feeling its effects today. He had an unproduced script that apparently J.J. Abrams has recently gotten a hold of and is going to release in the next couple of years. The plot of this is typical Twilight Zone-y, Rod Serling-ish story where a very rich, selfish, mean, nasty woman tries to have, I guess, retina transplant, optic nerve, something that's going to give her sight for only 12 hours because she was born blind. So she blackmails her doctor and she pays a guy who's desperate for money for his optic nerves, and she gets her sight back. However, immediately after she takes the bandages off, the big New York blackout of, I guess, 69 or 68, something like that, happens, and now she can't see anything because the entire city is engulfed in blackness. She ends up passing out in her apartment in frustration because she can't see anything, and wakes up the next morning and is able to see for like 40 seconds as the sun comes up, and in frustration she's banging on her window falls out, and she falls to her death and dies. Typical Twilight Zone ending. This is a TV episode that Steven Spielberg directed when he was a 21-year-old punk who knew everything. It seems that he already had a general idea of what his voice was going to be like. You can see a lot of the same style where he frames all of the actors inside of the same shot. It's weird. There's a couple of times where rather than showing the person who's talking, the focus is on the person who's reacting to what they're saying. He stays wide or medium as much as possible and only going in for the close-up for the final reaction or the things that need to be emphasized. I don't know how much of that was the art direction of Rod Serling, and if it was mainly Rod Serling, it had a huge impact on Steven Spielberg. I recently watched an interview with Spielberg where he said that he was actually not really happy with how this episode turned out. Looking back on it, you can see his immaturity where he tried to do stuff because it was fancy and not necessarily because it worked, and Rod Serling apparently had to re-edit it after he was done to get rid of some of his, as he called it, more European and auteur techniques. Yeah, that's a little weird. Well, yeah, this has been very short. This is Spielberg Project 1. Next week I'm going to do another episode of the Night Gallery that he also directed. This is going to keep going for a while because he's quite prolific. He did a couple of other random TV episodes even after the massive success of E.T. Tune in next week. I'm going to try and release an episode every Wednesday, so stay tuned, Spielberg fans and Storyline fans.